On paper, Garrett Mitchell, better known as Cleetus McFarland, finished 20th at Kansas Speedway on Saturday, April 18th, 2026. That is the number that shows up in the official results. That is the number that gets attached to his name in the record books. But if you close the tab after reading that number, you have completely missed one of the most compelling single race arcs of his young stock car career, because what actually happened at Kansas was not a quiet, forgettable afternoon. It was a race that contained a fresh new paint scheme, a genuinely funny pre-race joke about getting fired by his own sponsor, an 11-position charge through the field in the opening 5 laps, a run all the way up to 7th place, and then one of the most dramatic mechanical failures the ARCA Menards Series has seen this season, complete with oil on the front stretch, 2 other cars crashing in it, and a red flag that stopped the entire event. The finishing position tells almost none of this story, so here's the full version, in order, from the beginning. Let's start with what the results sheet actually says, because understanding how misleading it is sets up everything else. Officially, Cleetus McFarland finished 20th in Saturday's ARCA Menards Series tied 150 at Kansas Speedway. He completed 75 laps in the number 30 baldeagle.com Ford for Retta Jones Racing, while the race itself stretched to 108 laps due to late cautions and overtime. Gio Ruggiero won the race. Daniel Dye finished second, and Cleetus ended up buried deep in the final rundown. This was also his second DNF in 6 RKA National Series starts. Again, on the surface, that does not look good, but here is the thing. This was not a guy who rode around at the back all afternoon and got credited with 20th because everyone else crashed out. He was legitimately moving forward, legitimately racing well, and for a long stretch of this race, he had a real top 10 finish sitting right in front of him. The 20th place result and the actual run he put together are 2 completely different things, and treating them as the same thing is where most casual reads of this race go wrong. Before we get into the race itself, there was one visual change at Kansas that stood out immediately. Cleetus rolled into Kansas Speedway with a brand new paint scheme on the number 30. The Daily Downforce reported he was debuting a new look for this return to ARCA, and Retta Jones Racing confirmed the car would continue the kinetic partnership while prominently featuring baldeagle.com, which is Cleetus's own merchandise and content platform. This was not just the usual Cleetus car showing up with a fresh wrap. It had a different feel from the moment it unloaded in the garage, and it mattered beyond aesthetics because the baldeagle.com branding on the hood set up what became one of the funniest moments of his entire weekend. Since baldeagle.com is his own platform, the sponsorship arrangement essentially made him his own sponsor. He was funding the car through his own brand, and before the race, Cleetus leaned directly into that dynamic with one of the better pre-race lines you will hear in a garage this season. He said, "I'm going to be fired if I don't get a top 10. That was the entire punchline. His sponsor was himself, so this was Cleetus manufacturing pressure by pretending his own company was ready to show him the door if results didn't come. It landed because it was self-aware, it was funny, and it had just enough truth in it to sting a little. And it got significantly funnier and significantly more painful as the afternoon played out, because for a while, a top 10 was not just possible, it was genuinely right there. Kansas was not just another entry on the schedule for Cleetus. This was his 6th career ARCA Menards Series start at the national level, and it came at a genuinely important moment in his development timeline. The backdrop here is critical. Just days before Kansas, NASCAR had denied him O'Reilly Auto Parts Series Super Speedway approval after his no-EPS debut at Rockingham Speedway on April 4th, where he finished 32nd, 6 laps down, spinning twice and nearly going around on 2 other occasions. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell addressed the decision directly. It's kind of every race, so we go to the next race, we'll see. Obviously, there's some progression we need to see. I applaud our team. It's a tough call. He's a hugely popular driver, but these are the best drivers in the world, and we gotta make sure that we got the right guys out there. So Cleetus was walking into Kansas carrying that denial, but he was also carrying real momentum. He had finished 11th at Daytona earlier in the 2026 season, and Motorsport noted he was coming off a top 5 finish in ARCA East at Rockingham. The National Series resume was still short, but the evidence of improvement was there. Retta Jones Racing also made their intentions clear heading into the weekend. The team stated that Kansas would be his second ARCA start on an intermediate track, and that accumulating seat time on 1.5-mile tracks was a deliberate part of his development plan. Cleetus himself acknowledged the learning curve directly, quickly, saying that more laps and bigger track conditions were huge for where he was right now, because every race is still part learning process, part proving ground. Then came practice. In ARCA's official pre-race practice session, McFarland qualified 13th fastest in the number 30 baldeagle.com Ford. That was not front row speed, but for a driver still building familiarity with intermediate tracks, it was a legitimate indicator that he was not showing up completely lost. He had pace, he had a setup that worked, he had a car that could race. And then qualifying got washed out. Inclement weather canceled qualifying entirely, and ARCA's official starting lineup was set by the rulebook, which dropped McFarland all the way back to 25th on the grid. Just like that, the potential for a clean, quiet afternoon disappeared. If he wanted anything from Kansas, he was going to have to earn it the hard way, by passing cars, managing traffic, and doing it at a track where dirty air, restarts, and lane selection punish even experienced drivers. This is where the race became genuinely impressive. After starting 25th when inclement weather rained out qualifying, he quickly marched through the field at Kansas Speedway. He moved up 11 positions in the first 5 laps and was running 11th by the halfway break. Let that number settle, 11 positions in 5 laps. Starting 25th, by lap 5 he had already carved through nearly half the field. That is not surviving early chaos. That is not inheriting positions because someone else spun out. That is a driver actively making progress, reading lanes, executing passes, and racing with a level of composure that had not always been visible in his earlier runs. By the halfway break, he was sitting 11th. The top 10 was no longer a stretch goal. It was right there in front of him, and the contrast with Rockingham was impossible to ignore. At Rockingham, the conversation around Cleetus had been about spins, erratic moments, and whether NASCAR had seen enough to trust him with bigger events. At Kansas, for a long stretch, the conversation was the exact opposite. This looked measured. This looked cleaner. This looked like the kind of run you want to see from a driver who keeps being told he needs to demonstrate progression. He continued to make progress, reaching as high as 7th after a 3-wide pass on a mid-race restart. Read that again, 7th from 25th on the grid. That is not a solid run. That is a legitimately eye-catching drive through the field. He was not hanging on to the tail end of the lead lap. He was taking positions. He was finding pace on a 1.5-mile intermediate track, the exact discipline where his experience was thinnest, and he was making it look manageable. At that point, the race had turned into exactly the kind of afternoon his supporters had been waiting for. Every critic of his NASCAR presence defaults to the same question. Sure, he brings viewers, but can he actually race at this level? Kansas, through the first 2/3 of the event, was beginning to answer that with something more meaningful than any media segment could provide. He had gone from 25th to 11th by halfway, then all the way to 7th on pace. That is a race. That is not a gimmick. But then the car started talking to him, and what it was saying was not good. However, he soon began to fade, and that's because the engine was going sour. Running around 10th, the slight drop-off in lap times was not a setup issue or a tire issue. It was the beginning of a mechanical problem working its way toward a full failure. Oval Insider reported that he had been running 10th and had previously been as high as 7th when smoke began appearing inside the car. The team and driver both knew something was wrong. The question was whether the engine would hold together long enough to get to the checkered flag. It would not. With about 25 laps to go, the engine let go in a plume of white smoke and dumped oil all over the front stretch. This was not a small mechanical retirement that only the timing tower noticed. This was a massive failure that instantly turned the number 30 from a top 10 car into the center of the biggest incident on the racetrack. Andy Jankowiak and Isabella Robusto were running right behind him and crashed in the oil, spinning and slamming the wall. 2 cars, 2 impacts with the wall, all of it triggered directly by the oil Cleetus' engine had just deposited across the racing surface. ARCA officials displayed a red flag and halted the race to clean up oil from the incident. The timing made it feel particularly brutal. He had done all the hard work already. He had passed cars, managed restarts, executed a 3-wide move, and built himself a legitimate race position. The engine chose to expire with 24 laps remaining, after all of that had already happened, with the finish line still close enough to touch. But here is the moment that most people who only caught the highlights missed entirely. Despite the engine failure, Cleetus managed to keep the car in one piece as he slid sideways in his own oil through turns 1 and 2 without ever losing control. In the middle of a full engine failure, with oil on the track, smoke in the cockpit, and 2 cars crashing behind him, he kept the number 30 off the wall. He then stopped the car, and while hopeful he could somehow continue, his race was clearly over. If that car snaps hard right and hits the wall at that moment, the story of Kansas becomes significantly worse. Not just mechanically, but narratively. Instead, he threaded it through. The motor was done. The race was done, but he avoided turning a mechanical failure into a physical wreck. And in the context of a driver still trying to demonstrate racecraft to a skeptical NASCAR approval committee, that matters. Cleetus McFarland did not come out of the infield care center sounding beaten. He came out sounding like someone who knew exactly how much better the run had been than the number next to his name suggested. Standing outside the care center alongside NASCAR Cup Series driver Carson Hocevar, he delivered one of the more honest post-race reads you will get from anyone in a garage. Did you see that drift through the entire turn 1 and 2? That was awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that highlight reel of the baldeagle.com number 30. Overall, I had a blast. I made it 75 laps though, so that's pretty good. If we had blown the motor at 50, I probably would have shed a tear, but I made it through 75% of the race, so I'll call it a win. He also circled back to the sponsor joke that had started the weekend. He noted that he hoped baldeagle.com would not drop him, which again is funny precisely because baldeagle.com is his own platform and the only person making that call is himself. The joke worked before the race, it worked after the race, and it kept the whole story human rather than turning it into another stiff sports media autopsy of a DNF. His attitude here matters beyond the entertainment value though. After NASCAR denied him O'Reilly Superspeedway approval, this weekend could have easily turned into another "see I told you so" moment if he had circulated at the back all afternoon and never showed anything. Instead, he gave the sport a race where the result says 20th and the run says something considerably more interesting. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell had been clear after the Rockingham decision that approval is evaluated on a race-by-race basis, and that progression is what the sanctioning body is looking for. Kansas, before the mechanical failure, looked like exactly that progression. The position trail alone makes the argument. Started 25th, moved to 11th by halfway, reached 7th on pace, and was still inside the top 10 when the engine expired. NASCAR EVP and Chief Racing Development Officer John Probst had addressed the broader situation before Kansas, and his comments reflect where the sanctioning body actually stands. He's done a great job to this point. He understands the decisions that we have to make. There is a fine line to tread sometimes between the entertainment and the sport of racing. And I think that, shoot, we're all the folks in R&D. We watch Cleetus's videos. We like Cleetus. It's not like it's us sitting there saying, oh, we're out to get Cleetus. We're not. We love Cleetus. We love what he's done to our sport, or for our sport, and will continue to do. The position of NASCAR is not hostile, it is measured. They want to see consistent, clean racecraft at progressively challenging levels before they sign off on super speedways. A mechanical DNF at Kansas does not erase what he showed in the laps leading up to it. A clean but anonymous 15th place finish is actually a weaker development argument than what Kansas produced, because Kansas showed pace, movement, composure, and the ability to execute passes in traffic at an intermediate track. The engine failure took the result away. It did not erase the run. Both Cleetus and George Siciliano, better known as Squirrel McNutt, are confirmed to return for next weekend's ARCA Menards Series race at Talladega Superspeedway on April 25th. The rebound opportunity is immediate. Squirrel, for his part, had an impressive Kansas debut of his own, finishing 12th, one lap down in his first main ARCA division start. That result matters for the Talladega picture too, since both drivers have been working toward running that event together. For Cleetus specifically, Talladega is not unfamiliar territory. He finished 10th in the ARCA race at Talladega last season. He knows the track, he has laps there, and he arrives with more stock car experience under his belt than he had a year ago. Kansas was about proving he could navigate intermediate track traffic and manage a 1.5-mile oval at race pace. Talladega is the next benchmark, and if the run at Kansas carries any weight with the people watching his development at NASCAR, a strong result there becomes the kind of evidence that is very hard to talk around. The position trail from 25th to 7th, cut short only by mechanical failure, was the strongest case McFarland has made, yet that the progression NASCAR is asking for is actually happening. Talladega is the next chance to put a result next to that argument, and with the memory of Kansas still fresh, that race just became one of the more interesting storylines on the ARCA calendar.